Hi and welcome to Conversations with Robyn, and today's guest, Roger Green.
Hi Robyn.
Hi and thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Welcome to the show. Roger, we introduced you last week as being on this show, and last week we were in a house at Northern Beaches and we were talking about building biology with Alison Wilson. So you've got wireless broadband.
Yes.
You have cordless phones.
Yes.
What do you think you may end up doing with those two aspects?
Yet to be determined, but probably we'll talk about perhaps bringing cord phones back into the home. Certainly in the areas that have been most affected, and I mean it sounds like our living area here is quite affected. So, and look, I'm not on the phone that much, so it probably wouldn't be that major, change or stress to put a cord phone back in. So I'm really open to that. I think that's probably one big positive step. And then, of course, rearranging my daughter's room would be probably at the top of my list, which we've already started to do. The breaks.
They've been sneaking upstairs, and it's like, can we finish the filming?
That's right.
They've been so into it, which is really good to see.
Yeah.
Really good to see.
Yeah, I think there's some really good, positive, simple changes that we can make, and that obviously will make a big difference. So
it'll be interesting to see how you feel when you remove the wireless and the cordless, in terms of not only sleeping and energy levels.
Well, that's a good point, because I have been thinking, my sleeping. Have been feeling quite tired lately, and not waking up completely energised when I know I've had a good night's sleep.
You may have had the time, but it hadn't had the quality.
Exactly.
So that's one of the first things that people notice. They also notice things like they feel a little bit lighter, a little bit happier, less anxious about things. Some of them are quite subtle, but really impactful on life.
Yeah.
That's in addition to physical things.
Sure.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see.
It will be.
Yeah.
I'll keep you posted.
And it must be rewarding for you, Alison, when you come into people's homes, you show them the results, and they immediately go, wow, and start choosing to make positive change.
Look, it's fabulous. And I have had people who haven't slept properly for 2 or 3 years. When you say to people, how do you sleep, they always say fine, and then you explore a little longer and you find out that they've just got used to the poor quality sleep. And I've worked with people who maybe haven't slept properly for 2 or 3 years, have just got used to always feeling exhausted, and then they've made the decision to take the wireless off or something that's disrupting their sleep or moving their bed, and I get a phone call the next day and they say, I slept for the first time. And it was as simple as moving a bed, turning off a phone. Really, really simple, practical, hasn't cost them anything, and their whole quality of life starts to turn around. It's so simple, but it's incredibly rewarding because it makes a huge difference to people's lives. Yeah.
We're back in the same house as last week, and we're going to be following you around the house looking at Feng Shui. Would it be fair to say that you're one of the most foremost Feng Shui teachers?
Well, I was around right at the very beginning of the movement in the Western world. My background was in Chinese medicine, and I ran a school in Sydney, and I developed a Feng Shui curriculum 20 years ago, and that was pretty much before it became popular. It became very popular in the West about 15 years ago, and I had already developed a curriculum based on my Chinese medicine background, and essentially that took me to the four corners of the world. I've been teaching it very actively for the last 15 years.
Okay. Feng Shui, how would you describe Feng Shui?
Essentially, it is a balance between heaven, earth and humanity. That's one of the definitions. The word itself translates as wind and water. That's a poetical term for the forces of nature. Wind is this idea of the sort of activity of nature, the movement of nature, and water is the idea of stillness and containment. So wind and water are basically, the yin and yang of the environment, and that's the principles that we put into our Feng Shui.
Okay. Well, going back to your personal journey first, you were born in New Zealand.
Yeah, I'm a Kiwi.
You're a Kiwi. We won't hold that against you.
And then when I was about 21, I travelled the world and ended up in London. And then I was in London for about 5 years, and I got very much involved with alternative medicine. There was a centre there called the East-West Centre, and that's when I first came across Taoist philosophy and things like macrobiotics and shiatsu, and it was very much the beginning of the whole natural health movement and the natural food industry, and I was very actively involved with that. And then I came back to Australia, and I started the Australian School of Macrobiotics and the Glebe Healing Centre. And essentially that was a school that, you know, ran many different courses in natural healing, and that's where the Feng Shui, that was the first Feng Shui curriculum in Australia.
Okay, you've jumped a lot of years there. I'm going to jump back again a bit. Did you have a desire or a passion to do anything specific when you were a teenager?
I went to London for two reasons, punk rock music and meditation. Because it was
punk rock music, meditation, okay.
And it was the end of the 70s, and I was 21.
Okay.
And London was, you know, a very sort of vibrant city. And but I was in university up to 21, and I did have a sort of a transition of, you know, this was not what I really wanted to do, and I wanted to explore more Eastern philosophies and alternative ways of looking at the world that we live in.
Okay, well, what
yes,
were you...
that was it. I became very passionate about that.
Okay, what did you originally start studying at uni?
Science, chemistry, and maths and physics.
For what outcome?
I think I might have been a civil engineer or something.
Okay.
You know, but then I actually did change my topics to more art-orientated topics like anthropology, which was just a wonderful eye-opener for me. And
in what way?
Looking at culture, human culture. I love the subject.
Okay, so you'd gone from a fairly left brain modality to a right brain. And that was that what was it, rock and roll meditation? And
punk, it was punk at the time, although I was a product of the 70s, and meditation.
Okay.
And so that's when I was in London, I got involved with the Community Health Foundation, which was pretty much one of the most, it was the largest alternative health centres in the Western world at the time, and it ran many different activities, and that's where I first learnt about the relationship, you know, to food, to health. And at that time, of course, you know, we've come a long way in the last 20 years. Like, you know, when I was in London, you couldn't get your hands on organic food. There was only 2 health food stores. Things like, you know, tofu and the whole soybean industry hadn't really developed. And, you know, concepts like yin and yang and qi, you had to be very careful using those terms because nobody knew what you were talking about. You know, fast track, 20 years later, with, you know, the health food industry now is $1 trillion industry, and everybody knows yin and yang and qi, and they've all heard of acupuncture and
tofu
and all the other wonderful healing foods that we did get from the East. In a way, that's what Feng Shui is for me. For instance, Feng Shui is part of the 8 rays of traditional Chinese medicine. The roots of Feng Shui are in Taoist philosophy. And Taoist philosophy, which is, you know, based on yin and yang and how nature operates and the way we operate within nature and the cosmos, out of that philosophy you have practical modalities like acupuncture and massage and Chinese herbs, etc., and food energetics. And Feng Shui I often refer to as the last kid on the block, in the sense like 100 years ago we had acupuncture introduced to the Western world, and then in the 60s you had a flourishing of awareness with things like, you know, Zen and macrobiotics and, you know, natural healing and, you know, the whole consciousness movement. Then in the 70s you had, you know, things like Aikido and Tai Chi being introduced to the Western world, and yoga, of course. And then by the time the 90s came around, people were kind of prepared, culturally and energetically prepared, to look at the environmental science from the Eastern philosophies, and that's what Feng Shui is. It's a 5,000-year-old tradition, but it's very much you know, like the cutting edge of the eco movement and the eco design movement, and we're very much on the same page. Okay.
You mentioned yin and yang. For people who may be not too sure of those words, how would you describe yin and yang?
Yeah, your audience has probably all seen the Taoist symbol, the yin and yang symbol.
I never assume what the audience has or hasn't seen.
It's this one, folks. The bright and the dark, and you see it on surfboards and everywhere now.
Actually, we do, don't we?
Yeah. And so, very simply, when you sit down and sort of contemplate nature, you'll see that nature does two energetic dynamics. We have energy that's sort of moving up from the nighttime to the day, and it reaches its peak at noon, and then it starts to turn into its opposite and back towards the night. So very simply, it's like light and dark, or day and night. You can use it in the sense of the seasons, you know, the yang seasons, the springtime and summer, where the energy of nature is more expansive. So that's the archetypal phase of energy. It's expanding and going out to more of the periphery. And then it reaches its peak at the summer solstice, and then starts to move in towards the centre. That's what we call the more yin, downward moving, consolidating force. So for instance, late summer, in autumn and winter, that's what nature's doing. So the ancient Taoists, what they did was they just simply looked at what was going on in nature, and they started to make beautiful, very simple, very elegant little pictures of nature. One of them is the Taoist symbol. And, you know, essentially that yin and yang model is what you use in everything. You can describe everything: science, art, design, and of course internal medicine. It's used, you know, very, very deeply in Chinese medicine. The arts of, you know, food energetics. Some foods are more warming, some foods are more cooling. So generally we would say, oh, that's a more yang food and that's a more yin food. That knowledge brings you the ability to be able to make harmony and balance, and to be able to adapt to the changing environment. So that's, of course, what Chinese medicine is based on, and that's what Feng Shui is based on.
I'm glad I asked the question of yin and yang, because it's also masculine and feminine, isn't it?
It is, yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
We'll take a break and we'll come back and hear more about what you do in the world.
Great.
Stay with us.